Hi and welcome back to my channel. Today we're going to watch the second part of the second Punic War of Oversimplified. The first part was amazing. Got goosebumps at the end because of the build up to Hannibal's famous victory at the Battle of Cannae. Alright, original videos down below. Let's go.
This video was made possible by Cannae. Use code OverSimplified in the link below for an exclusive 60% off an annual Cannae plan. Hannibal's army had survived its famous crossing of the Alps, and he was now in Italy. With Hannibal's arrival, the Roman consul Scipio hit the ground running. In typical Roman fashion, he marched his army straight at the enemy, and Hannibal began preparing for his first combat with Rome on Italian soil. Before the battle, Hannibal wanted to inspire his men, so he staged a gladiatorial death match between captured Celt prisoners, with the winner getting prizes and freedom. He then explained that
that's
the
pretty
whole
cool.
thing was a metaphor. A metaphor? For what? You! These warriors are you! You're trapped in Italy with no escape. Your only choice now is to fight and win. What about the dead guy? That's you if you don't win. And the prizes? That's what you stand to gain by winning. And the fact that I soiled myself in all this excitement? No, that's not part of the metaphor.
I mean, that's a pretty good encouragement for the men, right? Okay. If he did, he probably did a gladiatorial death game, but you know. Okay.
Hannibal also smashed in the head of a goat. Again, for inspiration. Scipio, on the other hand, now arriving in the area, opted for the more classic route of a rousing pre-battle speech. Look at them men. Weak, starved by the Alps, while we are the strongest military in the world. This will be easy. Like
would they know that?
Horse-sized ducks fighting a baby-sized baby. It'll be like Mike Tyson in his prime, kicking a baby. A tug of war between 10 sumo wrestlers and a... Help me out here, Ralph. A baby, sir? Yes, that's it. A baby. The point is, there is absolutely no possible way we could lose a battle this easy. So, if everybody's ready, on my mark,
It was building to something.
The Battle of Ticinus was over almost as soon as it had begun, as the Romans found themselves completely outmatched by Hannibal's famed lightning-fast Numidian cavalry.
We had the Numidian cavalry before in the first Punic War.
The element in Hannibal's devastating double envelopment tactics.
Like Napoleon,
Scipio was wounded. Thankfully, according to some ancient writers, his handsome 17-year-old son, Scipio the Younger, saw his father fall. Scipio the Younger supposedly saved his father, and in the process, earned himself a lot of daddy's kisses. The Romans ended up fleeing the area, destroying the bridge behind them as they went. For a nation so overtly confident in victory, believing Hannibal to be an easy kill, the Romans found themselves running away with their tail between their legs. It was humiliating. And you know who thought so as well? The Celts. They began flocking to Hannibal's side, just as he'd hoped.
I mean, that's always... I mean, the enemy of my enemy is my friend. That's always the case. Right? You have this throughout history. You had it with Caesar on the series that I'm doing on Caesar, right? Some Gallic tribes want to be with Caesar to protect themselves against the German tribes, and then vice versa. It's pretty normal.
Even Celtic troops fighting for Rome in the Roman camp began to reconsider. Man, I'm thinking we should try to join Hannibal. I hear you. Maybe we should bring him a gift. What do you think he'd like? Oh, I know. Hey, Hannibal, we want to join your side, and we brought you a present. A gift? For me?
Oh, no.
I hope it's Roman heads. Oh, please be Roman heads. How did you know? Running away from Hannibal was humiliating enough, but having dozens of Romans beheaded in the night, Now that's embarrassing. Ticinus
Yeah.
had been a relatively small battle, but the psychological impact it had early on was huge, and it was...
I mean, yeah, it's a loss on your own territory for the first time ever, or at least against your main rival, right? That's pretty
It was
huge.
only just a taste of what Hannibal was capable of. Despite the shocking initial loss, however, Rome still didn't seem to fully understand the danger posed by the monster now loose in their territory. The Senate was full of excuses. It's those traitorous Celts. That's why we lost. Yeah, and it was a cavalry
right.
battle. Wait until Hannibal faces our almighty legions. And our consul is bald. Once he faces our other fully follicled consul, then he'll really pee his pants. That other consul, Longus, had been in the south all this time, preparing to invade Africa. He had seen some success, even capturing Malta. But then he heard the news. Hannibal's in Italy? And I'm being ordered home? But I was gonna be the big boy. I was gonna invade Carthage and win the war. Well, you can be a big boy at home. No! Does somebody need a nap, sir? No! No!
Wow. No! I mean, they're portraying him as a whiny little baby. I don't know if he was, but he was probably stuck up. Right? Okay.
So Longus brought his army on the long journey north. When he arrived in the area to decisively neutralize Hannibal, the two consuls joined their forces together, creating a double consular army. But the two consuls weren't exactly on the same page. Having a nice rest there, old man? I'm wounded, Longus. Pathetic. You don't understand. He's more dangerous than we thought. Maybe for you. Whoops. Listen, we can't just march straight at him like we normally do. We need to train our men through the winter, and we'll try again in spring. Sorry, I don't take advice from a bowling ball. Hey, I'll kick your ass, Longus. Any day now. I'm coming. Just you wait.
Wow.
Oh, Scipio, you feeble old man.
I mean, they're definitely portraying a foreshadowing and overconfidence on the Romans' part, right? Even though they lost, they're overconfident. They're blaming it on the Celts, blaming it on their consul, right, Scipio, and now they're bringing this overconfident consul.
Man.
Let's see how this works
Scipio
out.
was apparently quite cautious after his recent encounter with Hannibal, while Longus, typically Roman, couldn't wait to give Hannibal a swirly. So who would get their way? Well, when two consuls joined their forces, it turned out the Romans had an interesting system in place.
One thing though, I mean, it's good that he's seeking glory in that, Longus, right? Because that's the Roman way. That's how they conquered their neighbors and all that. And went from a tribe to a empire almost. A republic, but an empire. Right? So it makes sense. But you have to choose when to seek glory and when to be strategic, right?
They would each take turns being the one in charge. Consul 1 would lead one day, then Consul 2 the next. Back and forth.
That sounds bad.
Back and forth. As you can imagine, when the two consuls didn't agree, things didn't go so well.
Yeah.
In this case, due to Scipio's injury, Longus probably assumed even more command than normal. Hannibal had Celtic spies in the Roman camp. He fully understood the Roman system and Longus's hot-headed nature, and he knew he could exploit it. Hannibal needed to keep smashing the Romans in battle in order to maintain the loyalty of the Celts, and so he was eager to fight another battle. The combined Roman force possibly outnumbered him, so he carefully crafted a clever trap, and
I mean, he was outnumbered in the first battle, right? I believe so. Or it was the reverse, I don't remember, but I mean, I think Napoleon, when he studied Caesar and Alexander the Great, I think he studied Hannibal as well, because Napoleon's tactics are very similar to Hannibal's, right? You can see it.
He made sure to spring it, while
maybe Caesar did as well.
The plan began with his army getting an early night's sleep. All right, boys, time for lights out. Sorry, but we got a big day ahead of us. Tomorrow, we're gonna massacre the Romans. Good night, boys.
Wow.
Dream of revenge. Gorzog, send out the cavalry.
Uh-oh, what is that?
That night, Hannibal's Numidian cavalry made their way over to the Roman camp. arriving just before dawn. Hey, Romans, wakey, wakey! What the? What's going on?
Oh, keeping
Hey,
them up,
Longus,
right?
Your butt smells like a butt. It does not! Scipio, awaken the troops. Longus, these playground insults are clearly meant to lure you out. Well, it's
Right.
working. Send out the troops. Longus, it's clearly a trap. And I'm falling for it. Send out the troops. Hey, guys, wake up.
I mean, you can... This is 2020 vision. I mean, sure, to us it seems weird that he would wake up the troops when they're sleeping and go and chase the cavalry down. But I mean, if the cavalry breaks through the camp while the soldiers are sleeping, that's even worse, right? But the tactic here is obviously either to lure the infantry or other cavalry to a trap, or just to keep the soldiers awake so they didn't get their rest for the battle of tomorrow, right?
You're
You know.
heading out for battle. What? But we haven't had breakfast. We're skipping breakfast!
Uh-oh.
I don't think you can do that. As the Romans hurried out of camp, the Numidians began luring them back to the Carthaginian camp, where these gentle angels were just awakening from their slumber. Eat
Wow.
up, boys. We're having pancakes.
I mean, how much is Hannibal working though? It looks like he's non-stop working. It's amazing. It's like Napoleon, Caesar, Alexander Great.
The Carthaginians
Wow.
were enjoying their
That's
hearty
why he's one of the
breakfast.
greats.
The starving Romans were still on their way. Hurry up! We have to catch those Numidians. Hey, why have you stopped marching? Longus, there's a freezing river in front of us. Well, get your gluteus maximus in the water!
Wow.
All
I mean, that's a good
time
wake
to
up.
lather up. This oil will insulate you from the cold. It also smells like lavender. There's the Carthaginian camp. Get ready to fight, men. Sir, I think the water from the river is beginning to ice over.
Yeah.
I can't move. Oh,
Hypothermia.
sorry. You thought war would be fun? Sitting around a nice hot campfire playing Truth or Dare with your friends? Welcome to the real world! Truth. Who do you like?
I mean, it is true though, but
Sharon?
you need tactics.
Hey, look guys. The Romans are here.
Wow.
Having perfectly orchestrated events so that his enemy was cold, tired, and hungry, while his men
Right.
were well rested and covered in oil. When the two sides engaged one another, the Romans were in no condition to fight. And
Right, because think of this. A battle isn't just you fighting and maybe outflanking, which was and always has been a part of warfare. You're trying to outflank with cavalry or light infantry, right, to get to the rear of the opposing army. But this is another part of a battle, right? Wearing your enemy down. Hunger, the cold, the weather, maybe even too hot, right? Smart tactic of Hannibal.
cherry on top, the previous night, Hannibal had sent out an elite force of men led by his brother to go and hide behind a bush. They suddenly
Wow.
sprung out, encircling the
Wow.
exhausted Romans, who were then cut to pieces. Once again, Hannibal's superior cavalry and double envelopment tactics had flummoxed the Romans. But the key
I mean, the Romans has to learn something, right? They have lost twice now. Not from the exact same type of tactics, but they can see that Hannibal is a little more clever than you thought he
keyword at
was.
Trebia was control. Hannibal used his intel on the enemy and the environment of the battlefield to carefully
Yep.
control the conditions of battle, creating lots of little advantages for himself that paved the way to success. And concealing troops for
Yep.
an ambush? All of these things are what make Hannibal the genius he's remembered as today. As for Longus,
Yep,
he managed
sure.
to escape the battlefield with a small number of troops. Disgraced, he didn't want the Senate to find out what had happened, and he began obscuring communications back to Rome. Longus, where have you been? We've been looking for you. Nowhere in particular. Longus, 30,000 men are missing. Do you know
Wow.
where they are? They're taking a bath. 30,000 men? All in a bath?
I mean, a good leader would just be upfront with the loss and say, okay, I retire or something else like that. And let another maybe better commander lead the men, right? That would be a great leader, but you know.
Yes. Longus, what's under that rug? Aurora Borealis? Aurora Borealis?
Uh-oh.
Oh, well, that's my consulship over. Good luck with Hannibal. Bye.
Wow.
Trebia had been a disaster for the Romans.
Look at that. No. Look at that. 38,000 Hannibal had, 40,000 roughly the Romans had. Hannibal killed or captured 5,000 almost. Which makes sense because you saw the Romans breaking through in the center, right? But the Romans 20,000 to 30,000 killed or captured. And Hannibal's elephants almost all died of the cold after the battle, which makes sense. I mean, it's African elephants. They're not used to the cold. I mean, they crossed the Alps and the Pyrenees.
And
Wow.
as even more Celts began flocking to Hannibal, Rome largely lost its control over Cisalpine Gaul. In Rome,
Yep.
complacency turned to alarm. Hannibal had outwitted them on their own soil and inflicted a costly defeat. But with that, Scipio and Longus's terms as consul were over. They were replaced with two new consuls, Servilius and Flaminius. The Romans may now have begun to realize the trouble they were in and the genius Hannibal had shown in invading Italy. The Romans had expected to be the ones controlling this war. Remember, they thought they were going to invade Carthage. Now,
I mean, you can think about this. What happened if the Romans invaded Carthage? What would happen?
their plans
Maybe they
lay in
needed the
ruins,
troops
and
north.
They were levying 11 new legions to deal with the threat. Hannibal had
11.
completely redefined the war. But Hannibal had a little problem of his own. Things had gone well so far, but the Celts were notoriously fickle, and Hannibal needed to ensure he maintained their alliance and his base of support in Italy.
I mean, yeah, think of this. The Celts, they joined Hannibal because Hannibal showed strength, right? And not weakness. He has won battle so far, but when there's no battle to be fought, then there's no reason to be on Hannibal's side. Yes, Hannibal can kill you, but he can't kill all of you, right? And if he starts killing Celts, they probably either be neutral and defend themselves against Hannibal, or they go back to the Romans, right? So it's a tricky situation for Hannibal.
Any Celts he captured fighting for Rome, he treated extremely well and allowed them to return to their homes. But the longer he hung around in their territory, eating all their food and leaving beer trimmings in their sinks, the more resentful they may become. They wanted to go south and plunder some Roman booty, and Hannibal also hoped to sway Rome's other Italian allies in the south to his side.
Right.
So from here, the path was clear. Hannibal had to move south. Just one problem. There were two main routes Hannibal could take to move south. And wouldn't you know it, that's exactly where the two new Roman consuls had taken fortified positions. If Hannibal
Makes sense
tried
for
to
them.
move on them, he'd be fighting from a disadvantaged position and could be bottled in. There is a third option. Ooh, tell me. We could move through this vast impassable marshland flooded with dirty, stinky, disease-infested water that at times would come up to our necks. But there's no way we would attempt that, right? That'd be crazy, right? Hannibal? Hannibal's 4-day trek across the Arno marshlands was hell on earth. Almost as crazy as when he crossed the Alps. Imagine 3 full days, unable to sit or lie down, because there's nowhere to sit or lie down. Meaning 4 full days without sleep, slugging through heavy mud. You can...
I mean, I don't want to disgrace or discredit any military today, but I don't know any military force, a large one at least, maybe special forces troops would do this, but normal military, infantry, whatever, I don't think they could go through this, right? 3 days without being able to lie down or sit down, right? You stand and eat. Wow. And you probably get infection and die. I mean, wow. It's almost poetry with Napoleon, right? When he invades Russia, right? They go through hardship in the winter, or Napoleon goes first through very much hardship through the summer and loses I don't know how many percent of his men, and then goes through the winter and loses a lot of men as well. Looks like Hannibal is doing the same thing.
Contract cholera, your foot falls off, and Jim Bob directly in front of you won't
Yep.
stop pooping in your path. In fact, everybody's pooping in your path. Some
Yeah.
delirious, sleepless men would see clumps of mud and say, man, I could just sink into that.
Uh-oh.
And then they would. When pack
Right.
animals died, it gave nearby men a chance to rest, but only for a few moments before they were whipped back into line.
And we saw when they crossed the Alps that when the pack animal died, they would eat them. Here, I don't think they could eat them. Maybe just the top that hasn't sunk into the mud or marshes yet, right? This is almost worse than the Alps. On some parts, right?
Even Hannibal himself couldn't escape the torture of it. Hey Hannibal, if we see a Starbucks, can we stop? I need to take a leak.
Wow.
What? Geez, Hannibal. Looks like you picked up a nasty eye infection. Normally for this sort of thing, we just wash it out with some clean water. But as you can see,
Cut it out.
water everywhere, but it's full of Jim Bob's poop. No worries, Doc. I'll just take care of it myself.
Oh, yeah. Wow.
That'll be $3,000. When the now possibly one-eyed Hannibal...
Is that when he lost his eye? I thought he lost it in like battle or something. Or he... Huh. I don't remember him losing his eye through the marshes. That's very interesting. I mean, that's a stud of a guy, man. Wow.
And his army emerged from the swamp. They were shattered. But...
I mean, if they did this... Let's say it's like when they crossed the Alps. Let's say they did this. And at the other side, when they crossed the marshes, there were either Romans or another tribe or something that were attacking them. I mean, that would be devastating for him.
He had just managed to slip 50,000 men right past the Romans into rich Etrurian lands, where he could replenish his supplies, and his Celt allies could go crazy, securing Roman loot and booty.
I mean, this is exactly what Napoleon does with his corps. They live off the land, right? I mean, Caesar did the same thing, but he had supply lines. I mean, Hannibal can't have any supply lines here, it seems to me at least, right? Wow.
As fields and villages went up in flames, one Roman consul couldn't help but notice. The hot-headed Flaminius, feeling it was his responsibility to protect these lands, rather than waiting for a consul to come join him, immediately left to go chase Hannibal. Now, this Flaminius was an interesting character. He was what the Romans called a new man. He came from the lower plebeian classes of Roman society, and as a result, he reportedly had kind of a screw-you attitude to the establishment, and a big old arrogant chip on his shoulder. Picture Sid Vicious wearing a toga. That's Flaminius. And Hannibal, thanks to his spies, knew everything. Just as with Longus, Hannibal knew Flaminius was just the kind of man he could lure into a trap. Hannibal led Flaminius to the entrance of a narrow pass along the north shore of Lake Trasimene. Flaminius watched as Hannibal's army entered the pass. I've done it. I've spotted the enemy. Sir? That big follow us sign seems kind of like they're trying to lure you in. Yes, Gareth, and I'm taking the bait. Sir, this really seems like a trap. Yes, Gareth, and I'm falling for it. Daylight was fading, so...
But I mean, you could think from his perspective. I mean, Hannibal has pillaged and plundered their land, right? So they're thinking we need to get him before he does even more damage or get to Rome or something, right? But he's a hothead, I guess, right? So,
for now, the Romans set up camp. The two armies encamped across the lake from one another, and night fell over the two camps. In the morning, Flaminius would catch up to Hannibal, and he would be the hero of Rome.
Is that Regulus?
For now, the Romans got nice and comfy in their beds. Good night,
Uh-oh.
Flaminius. Good night, Rome. Good evening, Hannibal.
Yeah,
During
that's
the
what I
night,
thought.
Hannibal ordered total stealth.
Wow.
As 10
I mean, it's like reverse when he fought Flavius, right? His men got rest, Hannibal's men got rest, while the Romans tried to attack. And yeah, now it's then reverse.
thousands
Yeah.
of troops
Normal tactic though.
scaled the wooded hills above the pass,
Wow.
completely undetected by Rome's scouts.
Wow. I mean, couldn't they even hear them?
Let's go, girls. Flaminius took off across the lake shore to
Oh,
try to catch
no.
Hannibal. As he did, even the weather seemed to be on Hannibal's side.
But one thing though, they haven't. I don't know anything about this, but it seems like Hannibal's men haven't got rest. Maybe they have got the rest they needed and food. Maybe, I don't know. But it's weird that the scouts of the Romans haven't found them or heard them. Maybe they have heard them and maybe think that that's from the camp or something, right? I guess so. But this looks like a disaster. The river to your right or back when you're turning to the woods. Wow.
A thick fog rose from the surface of the lake, obscuring
Uh-oh.
visibility. Look at this! This is perfect! The mist will obscure our approach. Hannibal will never see me coming.
Right. Uh-oh.
Sir? Why does it sound like 50,000 Carthaginians are charging down the hill towards us? You mean
Wow.
50,000 Carthaginians are charging right into my trap? The Romans found themselves completely
Yeah.
hidden on all sides. With zero visibility in the fog, the fighting was terrifying and chaotic. Troops were pushed into the lake in their heavy armor, where they were either cut down or drowned. And Flaminius, who likely stood out like a sore thumb in his consular,
Oh, Flaminius.
caught the attention of one Celt warrior, with his
Uh-oh.
head possibly swirling with thoughts of how the Romans had decimated his homeland. According to the ancient writers, this Celt took his chance.
Wow. Whoa, that's awesome. Wow.
In the 3-hour-long massacre, 15,000 Romans were killed,
3
and
hours.
an equal number captured. And
I mean, that's as devastating as the first battle. I mean, almost everybody died or were captured.
an
Wow.
entire army completely wiped out, along
Right.
with their consul. During the battle,
Wow.
the Roman vanguard had managed to break through at the front
There you go.
and climbed the hill above the fog. When the mist cleared, what they saw was
Oh
a
my.
blood-red lake and a sea
Imagine being
of
there.
Roman bodies.
I mean, imagine being one of those soldiers. Wow. And I like this. I mean, this is one of the best oversimplified I've ever seen, right? The storytelling that he's doing, right? Wow, what a massacre.
Worse yet, when the other consuls sent cavalry to try to aid Flaminius's doomed legions, they too were caught and defeated. A double
Wow.
disaster.
But again, what does Rome do? When they lost majorly, especially with the ships in the first Punic War, what did they do? They kept going until they won. Resilience. While Carthage, when they lost, they hid, paid some mercenaries, won, and then still lost or conceded.
Rome went into a frenzy. For the second time, Hannibal had completely decimated an entire Roman army. Romans were dying by the tens of thousands. Common citizens began flocking to the city for safety.
Uh-oh.
Women waited by the city gates in tears,
Wow.
hoping to hear news of loved ones. This one man, having just led his battered army across the Alps the previous year, now stood less than 100 miles from Rome.
I mean, this I can understand why later on in Rome's history, when Rome is an empire and it has an emperor, I don't know which emperor it was, but he put up statues of Hannibal in Rome. Now I can understand why that is so disrespectful. to Rome's history. Wow.
To this point, he had been a problem. Now, Hannibal was a crisis.
Yep.
And in a crisis, Rome took desperate measures. They actually had a system in
Dictators.
place when dealing with an emergency of this magnitude. They would forgo their two-consul power-sharing system and instead temporarily give one man near total power and authority to be as decisive as he needed and help
Wonder who's
salvage
this
the situation. This all-powerful position in Rome's government had a name: dictator. It's actually where we get the word. But unlike modern dictators, Roman ones didn't score perfect rounds of golf or ride bears through the Siberian tundra. They held their power for just 6 months before they were required to give it up. And in Rome's hour of need, the man chosen to be dictator in 217 BC, one of the most highly esteemed members of the Roman Senate, Fabius Maximus.
Yes.
So how would Fabius, as dictator, confront Hannibal? Well, Fabius understood that marching all of Rome's young men straight into a one-man meat grinder was bleeding Rome dry. Hannibal was clearly too dangerous to face head-on in battle.
I mean, again, this sounds like the coalitions against Napoleon. What tactic did they use later on against Napoleon? They didn't go straight in to attack Napoleon. They went for his vanguard or rear and attacked his marshals, right? Single course they attacked. And then maybe when Napoleon was so small, they attacked him. Right, like at Leipzig, right? This sounds like the same strategy. Don't go directly in for Hannibal, right? Maybe go for his rear, go for some scattered troops or something like that, right?
However, he was also stuck in their territory with dwindling manpower and forced to live off the land. It wasn't a sustainable position to be in long term, and he could only remain there for so long. So, if Rome avoided battle with Hannibal to prevent any more crippling losses, and instead simply maneuvered around him, blocking supplies and taking out smaller contingents where possible, Hannibal would gradually become weaker, while they would gradually become stronger.
I mean, this is scorched earth, right? Taking away your own supplies in your own territory, but making sure that the enemy doesn't get it. And they are living off the land, not you. You're also that, but not there particularly. So just scorch earth all the way. That makes sense.
And so Fabius presented his new idea to the Roman Senate. Okay, guys, I have an idea. See if you can follow me here, okay? Instead of fighting Hannibal, when he approaches, we run away.
Right. I don't think they like that,
Fabius's strategy couldn't have been any less Roman. Romans were meant to march headfirst into battle, not run away from it. It seemed cowardly, and Fabius was extremely unpopular. At this point, Hannibal was continuing south. He had to stay on the move to keep his army fed, and he was still aiming to undermine Rome's alliances in the south. As he went, in a calculated display of aggression, he devastated the Roman countryside and killed many Romans, all in plain sight of Fabius and his army. We're just gonna stand here? Yes. Are you a coward? No. But Fabius, that's my farm. Well, MacDonald, thank you for your sacrifice. You're a hero now. Think of the stories you'll tell. Old MacDonald had a farm.
Wow. That's good writing.
You know who else hated Fabius's strategy? Hannibal. He understood the danger he was in. Turning Rome's allies against her required Hannibal to keep smashing the Romans in battle. He couldn't do that if Fabius wouldn't fight him. Multiple times, Hannibal tried to goad Fabius into a fight, but Fabius wouldn't bite. Failing that, he tried to turn Rome against Fabius. According to the writer Livy, he burned down all the farms he could, but any farm he learned was owned by Fabius himself. He left well alone. Hey, Fabius, why isn't he burning down your farm? You got some sort of a...
You see, Hannibal knows the ins and outs of Roman politics, it looks like. Right? And he has spies as well. Wow.
Secret deal with him? What? Of course
it's like Vercingetorix.
too, please. What? Burn my farm too, please. No. Remember our secret deal.
What?
Well, you got to admit, he's a genius. Hannibal's problem, however, was that he had
True.
to stay on the move to keep supplying his army from the local lands. At one point, he entered Campania, one of the richest regions of Italy. Great
Yep.
for resupplying, and great for showing up Fabius in front of Rome's South Italian allies. But he was caught in a valley, and Fabius quickly moved to block his escapes.
Wow.
We've got him. After he's used up all the valley's supplies,
Uh-oh.
he'll starve. Sir? What are all those lights leaving the valley? Is he trying to escape? Lights in plain view. Well, that's a trap if I've ever seen one. And we're falling for it! Suspecting
Oh
a trap,
my.
Fabius refused to budge. But other Romans in the valley rushed to confront Hannibal, only to find the Carthaginian army was actually just a herd of oxen with torches tied to their heads. They
Wow,
then found
look
themselves
at
caught
that.
in an ambush. With the Romans distracted,
Wow.
Hannibal's army was able to slip away into the night, unopposed. Classic Hannibal. For all
Look
his
how
inaction,
smart he is.
the dissatisfied Romans mockingly dubbed him Fabius, the Delayer. But the thing is,
Wow.
Fabius's strategy was probably the best thing he could have done.
That's
He
true.
was right that constant encounters with Hannibal were bleeding Rome dry. And
But again, though, how it's all about how long the populace will and Senate will, I don't know, accept that Hannibal is pillaging the entire Roman peninsula, right? It's always that case.
And the time he took allowed Rome some breathing room to recover their forces when they desperately needed to, while
Right.
putting Hannibal into an increasingly more difficult position. Modern historians view Fabius's strategy as generally a good idea. To
Yeah.
this day, the act of not engaging an enemy, but instead gradually wearing them down, is still referred to as the Fabian strategy. But when Fabius's term
Sure.
finally came to an end, the Senate couldn't have been
Uh-oh.
happier. It was time to start fighting again. However, they probably had a little chat about how they were going to go about it. See, Hannibal's tactics up until now had been very sneaky. Or,
Yep.
if you're a Roman, you might say dishonorable. I'm sick of it. Every time
Right.
we try to take this guy down, we march straight at him. But then, oh no, Hannibal's hiding in a bush. Hannibal's got 30,000 men up a tree. At this point, I'm not convinced my wife isn't just Hannibal wearing a disguise. Cooey. Look, this time we obviously have to switch something up. Now granted,
Okay.
we're Roman, so we're gonna march straight at him without thinking. That can't be
Uh-oh.
helped. It's in our blood. But
Sure.
I have a proposition.
Uh-oh.
This time, when we march straight at him, we do it with a massive army.
Ah, makes sense.
80,000 men. It won't matter what
Wow.
kind of shenanigans he pulls. He can.
I mean, imagine if they used 80,000 men in Fabian's strategy, right? But, you know, you need to lose a lot before you learn.
Hide in all the bushes he wants. There's no way he can possibly beat off 80,000 men.
One thing, though. One reason why Hannibal is so successful is also because you could say you can say the Romans are they're not learning from their situation. Right? It's like Napoleon. I mean, Napoleon was good because his opposing forces, a lot of them didn't know what strategy he was using against them. Same with Caesar. So he was more successful, right? Obviously, Caesar was good and Hannibal was also good. But their enemies didn't know what they were using as tactics, so it was a little bit easier for them to win, right? But, you know. Uh-oh.
And so it was. With 2 new consuls, Rome put together a massive army, the biggest Rome had ever fielded, to put Hannibal away once and for all. To gather the men required, 2/3 of them ended up being completely inexperienced.
Uh-oh.
But how much experience does it take to be expendable war fodder?
That's
As
true.
This massive army set out in the summer of 216 BC. The Romans knew they needed to win this battle. Just one victory over Hannibal would likely be enough to end his entire campaign. And
Yeah.
this time, their overwhelming manpower gave them confidence they could do it.
Pretty
Hannibal
hot.
had taken position at the town of Cannae, where he had captured
Uh-oh.
an important Roman supply depot. With Fabius gone, Hannibal knew a battle was likely coming, and he...
See? Hannibal knows the ins and outs of Rome. How does he know that? He has probably spies. And he probably travels from the Senate to the people to other people around Rome. Wow.
was eager to fight it on his terms. But when his men looked out at the Roman camp, they couldn't believe what they were seeing.
Right.
That army's huge. There's no way we can possibly beat off all these men. How are we gonna beat off all of these men? You know what I mean. I think he's right, Hannibal. Hannibal is then said to have replied, Gisco, my friend, don't worry. There may be a lot of them, but amongst their ranks, there's not a single man named Gisco.
Wow.
This joke was apparently so funny that his officers began to laugh and laugh. And when his men in the camp heard the laughter, they were like, hey, they're laughing. I guess that means we're gonna win the battle.
Yay.
Hooray!
That's
As
how
for the
that
Romans,
works.
The consuls were another pairing between an inexperienced hothead and a wise scholar. Although the main historian from this era was good friends with Paulus's family, so take that with a grain of salt.
Right.
On his day of command, the rash and hasty Varro,
Uh-oh.
despite the apparent pleas from Paulus, sent the army out for battle. And when Hannibal saw this, he did the same. And here comes the single largest battle of the Second Punic War.
Yep.
And one of the most renowned battles in history. The
Yep.
infamous Battle of Cannae. In all the pre-battle maneuvering, Hannibal was able to ensure
This is so
his army
epic.
was fighting from the south. This meant the seasonal dust-carrying winds were to his back and blowing directly into the faces of the Romans.
Right.
Like I said, control. After 2 years in Italy, Hannibal's infantry had dwindled to about 40,000. The Romans possibly outnumbered him 2 to 1. Their
Okay.
army was so big that their maniples stretched far deeper than they normally would. The
Wow.
Romans planned to charge Hannibal's thin, weak line like a battering ram and break it. They also
Sure.
chose a narrow battlefield in the hopes it would prevent Hannibal's far superior cavalry from being able to outmaneuver them.
That's smart, but also it makes your numbers go down, right? You have deeper ranks, but not as wide ranks.
They wanted an honorable battle where pure strength, rather than trickery, would decide the outcome.
Uh-oh.
If Hannibal had his say, however, trickery might end up having a lot to do with it.
Yep.
He ordered his line to position themselves as an outward bulge, with his weakest troops at the very center. Just behind them, out of sight from the Romans, stood the elite Libyan infantry, waiting
Uh-oh.
for their moment to strike. The battle commenced as the massive Roman troops smashed into the Carthaginian center. The shape of Hannibal's line ensured the overwhelming weight of the Romans hit his weakest troops first.
Yep.
And they were pushed back. Hannibal's
Uh-oh.
outward bulge reversed inward, with the Romans being funneled in towards the weak center. Hannibal had positioned himself at the center to encourage the troops to hold out as long as possible
Makes
against
sense.
the Roman onslaught. Because while the Romans were unleashing carnage on the center, Hannibal's cavalry needed time to do their job.
Yep.
The heavy cavalry on the left, after a barbaric fight, sent the Roman horse packing, with the consul Paulus even sustaining a severe head injury. He
Wow.
managed to move into the center to keep the battle going. Then, the heavy cavalry turned and approached Varro's
Uh-oh.
cavalry from behind. At the first sight of the coming Carthaginian envelopment, Varro ordered his horsemen to flee the battlefield.
Wow.
The Carthaginians had won the cavalry battle.
Uh-oh.
But back in the center, according to some accounts, Hannibal's line did eventually end up caving to the massive weight of the Romans.
Right.
And they began to flee. The Romans pushed deeper, and organization within the army likely broke down as they
Yep.
became a giant mass, trying to massacre the fleeing Carthaginians. They didn't realize that they were playing right into Hannibal's hands.
Uh-oh.
At that moment, Hannibal's elite units, having done no fighting yet, and therefore fresh as a daisy, turned and smashed into the Roman sides.
Wow.
Many of these
Look
troops
at
were
this.
wearing Roman helmets and armor they had picked up after previous battles. And
Wow,
the confused Romans
really?
may not have even realized they were the enemy. As
Uh-oh.
Hannibal managed to regain the composure of his center and encourage them back into the fight, the Carthaginian cavalry swooped in from behind.
Look at
And
this.
look at what lies before you.
This
A
is a
military
massacre.
general's wet dream. The
Yep.
total encirclement of a much larger force by a much smaller force.
One thing though, I'm sorry I have to interrupt. One thing about this that is dangerous is that, yes, you have encircled them, but again, you're a weaker force than the encircled troops. Meaning if they break out, they can do the same thing to you because they're outnumbering you. But they have cavalry in the rear. Wow.
The Romans were trapped. Hannibal had unbelievably managed to use their own superiority in numbers against them. Rather than simply encircling them, he had actually allowed them to use their own immense power and push themselves into an encircled position. This was the genius of Cannae. And with that, the annihilation began. For hours, the Carthaginians slaughtered the helpless Romans from all sides. The terrified Romans were so tightly packed that at times they couldn't even lift their arms to defend themselves.
Right.
The killing went on so long that the...
I mean, sorry again to interrupt, but it's like if you've seen Game of Thrones and the Battle of Bastards, when they're encircled, it's like that. I mean, you can barely breathe, right? Because you're just pressed into each other because you don't want to die. So you go more center and you're unable to fight.
The Carthaginians became exhausted from the non-stop massacre. And by the time the butchery came to an end, the grim toll spoke for itself. To Hannibal's several thousand lost, the Romans suffered 60 to 80,000 dead or captured.
Wow.
Yet another entire army wiped out by Hannibal.
And it's the biggest army that Rome has ever fielded, right? They had a lot of army, a huge army, like 100,000, 150,000 men on ships, but they didn't field them.
Many high-ranking Romans met their end at Cannae.
Makes sense.
For one, but also 80 senators and
wow.
more. It's been estimated that 20% of Rome's male population aged 18 to 50 died at Cannae.
It's like World War I or World War II for some countries. Like World War I, that's like Serbia's number. Or like World War II, that's like Poland's number. Wow.
This was it.
Percentage.
Hannibal's vengeance. The stunned Carthaginians, as they searched for their own survivors among the dead, couldn't believe the sight of it. An estimated 30,000 gallons of blood now lay spilled on the battlefield. Rome's defeat at Cannae sent shockwaves throughout Italy.
Right.
Just as Hannibal had hoped, most of southern Italy now defected to his side.
This could break Rome.
The second largest city on the peninsula. Wow. Hannibal, this is incredible. What could possibly come next? Next? Jim Bob. I've killed 150,000 Romans. I've turned her allies against her. That's it.
Is it now?
Vengeance. So let me tell you what comes next. Rome surrenders.
This is a problem though. Hannibal is declaring himself victorious in a war when the defeated hasn't called themselves that yet. Let's see.
Their territories are reduced. We recover our lost islands.
Wow.
And Carthage dominates the Mediterranean once again.
Look at that.
But sir, what if they don't surrender?
Uh-oh.
Jim Bob, did you miss what just happened? Of course they're gonna surrender.
Sure.
Throughout his campaign, Hannibal had shown himself to be very adept at reading the Roman mind.
Yep.
But if he now thought that Rome might surrender, it was the first time he severely underestimated them.
Yeah, because he's probably thinking what Carthage did in the first Punic War, right? They surrendered. They also called themselves victorious even though the Romans didn't call themselves defeated.
And he was about to discover an extremely inconvenient fact about Rome.
Yep.
Rome never surrenders.
Yep.
At a Roman survivors' camp near Cannae, one young officer overheard some troops discussing how they would flee Rome. Drawing his sword, he threatened to cut down any man that would abandon Rome in its hour of need.
Who's this?
That officer was Scipio the Younger.
Yep.
But soon enough, the Romans would come to call him Scipio Africanus,
Yep.
the hero of Rome.
Wow, again, I just got goosebumps. Alright, so he's continuing this. I mean, probably gonna be 4 parts almost, right? Wow. Amazing. As always, Oversimplified is always amazing. Look at this. I mean, I think this is probably the biggest series he's ever done, right? More than 2 parts? Wow. Alright, I'll see you in the next video. Bye.